Welcome to Stories Between Lives. Harlan Birch was counting his hives when he heard the gate. He did not look up right away. He had learned, over 64 years of living on this hill, that most things announce themselves twice. Once with sound, and once with meaning. And that a man who reacts to every sound misses the meaning half the time. The bees moved around him in their slow, purposeful way. The morning was still. The Ozark Hills rolled south in long green waves under a sky the color of creek water held up to the light. He set his smoker down on the flat rock beside Hive 7, and then he looked up. A woman stood at the gate. She was thin, too thin. She had a child on her hip, a girl, maybe 3, and another one standing beside her, a boy of about 6, holding the hem of her coat with both fists. The coat was wrong for the season, too light for October in the hills. The woman's hair was pulled back, and she was not looking at him with the expression of someone who has come to ask a favor. She was looking at him with the expression of someone who has run out of other options and is trying not to show it. He walked to the gate. He was a big man, slower now than he'd once been, with the deliberate movement of someone who has learned that rushing rarely improves a situation. "Can I help you?" he said. She hesitated. "1 second, 2. I was wondering," she said carefully, "if I could trouble you for some water." He looked at her. He looked at the children. He looked back at her. "Well," he said. He opened the gate. Her name was June Mallory. She was 37 years old, and she had been driving since before dawn with $40 and a car that had overheated twice, and a destination she was not entirely certain of, which was her sister's house in a town called Aldgate, 40 miles further on. She had not meant to stop here. She had seen the hand-painted sign at the road, Birch Hill Honey, and a gravel lane going up. And the children had needed water, and she had needed a moment to think. And she had turned in before she'd fully decided to. She told him a version of this at the kitchen table while he poured water from the pitcher and set out a plate of biscuits, because his hands knew how to feed people before his mind had caught up to whether he'd been asked to. The girl, her name was May, drank her water in 2 long swallows and then held out the cup for more without speaking. The boy, Daniel, ate 2 biscuits in the careful, contained way of a child who has learned not to reach. Harlan watched them eat. He did not pepper her with questions. He asked one thing at a time, slowly, and she answered in the same way. One thing at a time, without elaborating more than the question required. She was from Arkansas. She had been living with her children in a situation that she described only as one that had needed leaving, and the way she said it told him everything the words left out. Her sister was expecting her. The car had given trouble. She was fine. He did not say, "You don't look fine." That was not the kind of thing he said. He said, "Your radiator needs looking at." She said, "I know." He said, "I can look at it." She said, "I can't pay you." He said, "I didn't ask you to." His children found out by noon. His daughter Lynette called first. She had a way of knowing things on this property that Harlan had long since stopped trying to explain. A network of neighborly awareness that he privately thought of as the Hill's own telegraph. Lynette was 41 and efficient, and loved him in the exacting way of a person who expresses love through the management of risk. "Daddy," she said, "Patsy Groover says there's a woman and 2 kids up at your place." "There is," he said. "Who is she?" "Her name's June." Her car broke down. A pause. "Daddy, you don't know this woman. I know she's thirsty and her children are hungry," he said. "That's enough to start with." Another pause, longer. "I'm coming up." "You don't need to." "I'm coming up," she said. His son Boyd called 20 minutes later with the same information, and a different tone, less managing, more accusatory. Boyd was 38 and had their mother's jaw and his own ideas about the property that had been sharpening for several years, like a tool being kept ready for a job. "Who is she?" Boyd said. "Where's she from?" "You don't know what kind of situation you're walking into, Dad. I'm fixing a radiator," Harlan said. "I'm not walking into anything." "I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying," Harlan said. "I'll talk to you later." He hung up and went back out to the car. June was standing beside it, watching him work, with May on her hip again and Daniel sitting on the stone wall eating a third biscuit that Harlan had wrapped in a cloth and sent with him. The October light was coming through the apple trees in long broken pieces, and the orchard smelled the way October orchards smell, of cold and sweetness and something almost finished. "You don't have to do all this," June said. "I know it," he said from under the hood. "We'll be out of your way soon. Take the time it takes," he said. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You live here alone?" "Going on 3 years," he said. "That's a lot of land for one person." "It is," he said. "My wife liked it that way. Said the land needed room to breathe." June looked out at the orchard, at the hives on the hill above it, at the stone wall running along the east side of the property, old and mossy and solid. She had good taste, June said. He looked up at that. He didn't say anything. But something in his face shifted, just slightly, the way a door shifts when the wind changes direction outside. "The honey," June said, nodding toward the barn, where a row of labeled jars sat on the shelf in the open doorway, amber in the morning light. "Does it sell?" "Enough," he said. "Frances started it. I keep it going." "Frances was your wife?" "Was," he said. And then, quietly, still is, in the ways that count. May reached out from June's hip and pointed at the jar of honey on the nearest shelf, the one with the faded paper label in Frances's handwriting, "Birch Hill, October," and said, with the unambiguous authority of a 3-year-old, "That." "May," June said. "It's all right," Harlan said. He picked up the jar and brought it to May. She took it in both hands and held it up to the light the way children hold things they find beautiful, and the honey glowed gold and clear in the October sun. Lo, that he did not know yet. What was underneath the quiet of this woman and her careful children? What had brought her not just to this hill, but to this specific gate? He would not understand it until later, but something in him, some instinct older than reason, had already felt it the moment she looked at him at the gate. She was not simply a stranger. Lynette arrived at 2 o'clock. She was polite. That was the thing about Lynette. She was always polite. She shook June's hand. She admired May's red wool hat. She asked Daniel what grade he was in. And all the while her eyes were moving over the situation with the swift professional assessment of a woman who has decided there is a problem and is identifying its dimensions. She pulled Harlan aside by the barn. "Daddy," she said, very quietly, "she can't stay here." "She's not staying," he said. "She's leaving when the car's ready. The car won't be ready until tomorrow at the earliest. The parts you need, you'll have to get from town in the morning." He had already known this. "So she'll stay the night," he said, "in the spare room." Lynette looked at him. "You don't know her. I know what I need to know." "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, "that a woman and 2 small children are not a threat to me, Lynette. And a man who can't offer a bed and a meal to someone who needs it, that's not the kind of man your mother would have lived with for 38 years. Lynette was quiet. That was the argument she couldn't answer, not because she didn't have words, but because she knew he was right, and the knowing sat in her chest like a stone. "Boyd's coming tomorrow," she said finally. "Boyd is welcome," he said, "same as always." She left. went back to the orchard. June was there with the children, moving slowly along the row of apple trees, looking at what was left on the branches. Not much, this late, but a few. Daniel had found a stick and was tapping it against the trunks in the exploratory way of a boy who needs to understand the physical world by striking it gently. May had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder. Then, June stopped. She was standing at the end of the orchard row, at the old stone marker Harlan had never moved, the one Frances had found when they first bought the property and had insisted on keeping because she said old things deserved to stay where they were put. It was a small flat stone, maybe a foot across, with a name carved into it that was worn almost smooth. June was looking at it. Her hand had gone still on May's back. "What is it?" Harlan said, coming up beside her. June looked at the stone. Then she looked at him. Her face had changed. Something had surfaced in it. Not fear, not quite. Recognition. The particular look of a person who has found something they didn't know they were looking for. "That name," she said. He looked at the stone. Mallory Frances had always thought it was a previous owner's family marker. They had never traced it. "That's my family name," June said quietly. He looked at her. He looked at the stone. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The bees moved in the hives on the hill above them, their sound steady and low, like the sound of something that has been going on long before any of this, and will go on long after. Frances used to say, Harlan said finally, slowly, that this land had a memory, that it knew who belonged to it. June's hand was on the stone now, her fingers on the carved letters. "My grandfather," she said. "He had land in this county, before the Depression. He lost it." She paused. He never talked about it, but he kept a picture of a hill with apple trees. The tin dipper on its nail by the well caught the afternoon light. It had hung there since Frances put it up 30 years ago. It was just a dipper. But standing here, with the worn stone under June's hand, and the orchard breathing around them, and the children quiet in the October air, Harlan felt the particular weight of a moment that has been assembling itself from a long distance, and has finally arrived at where it was always going. Boyd came in the morning, as promised, with the parts and with his jaw set. He was not rude. Boyd was never technically rude. He was precise. He shook June's hand. He looked at the children with the carefully neutral expression of a man managing his reaction. He helped Harlan install the parts, efficiently and mostly in silence. And then, when the car was running and June was packing the few things she'd brought inside, Boyd came to stand beside his father at the porch rail. "She tell you much about herself?" Boyd said. "Enough," Harlan said. "You know she's got nothing," Boyd said. "No money." "No, Boyd." Harlan turned to look at his son. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "I know what you're worried about. The property. What's going to be yours, eventually." He paused. "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it as your father talking, not as something to have an opinion about. This land has had a Mallory on it before, and I didn't know it, and Frances didn't know what she knew when she kept that stone. But the land knew." He looked out at the orchard. "I'm not asking your permission to be a decent human being. I'm telling you what happened here. What you do with that is yours to carry." Boyd was quiet for a long time. "You're going to see her again," he said finally. It was not a question. "She's got my number for when the car gives trouble next," Harlan said. "After that, we'll see." Boyd picked up his keys. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Mom would have liked her," he said. And then he got in his truck and drove down the hill. June came out with May on her hip and Daniel holding her hand, the red wool hat on his head now against the October cold. She stopped at the well. She looked at the tin dipper on its nail. She touched the handle. "My grandfather used to say that water from a deep well tastes different than any other water," she said. Said you could tell how far down the goodness was by how cold it came up. Harlan lifted the dipper off its nail and filled it from the well and handed it to her. She drank. She was quiet for a moment. "Cold," she said. "Deep well," he said. She handed the dipper back to him. He hung it back on its nail. They stood there for a moment in the clear October morning, the bees moving on the hill, the orchard standing in its autumn quiet, the stone marker down in the last row of trees where it had been waiting for 60 years or more. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it. Drive safe," he said, "and call when you get to your sister's." She looked at him. "You want me to call?" "I do," he said. She nodded. She put the children in the car. She started the engine, which turned over clean and strong. She rolled down the window. "That honey jar," she said. "May won't let go of it." "Good," he said. "It's hers." She drove down the hill. He watched until the car turned onto the road and was gone. Then he walked back up to the hives and stood among them for a while, the smoker cold in his hand, the bees going about their long and patient work. The months arranged themselves the way months do, by small things, more than by large ones. She called from her sister's house that afternoon. They talked for 20 minutes. They talked again the following Sunday. By December, she had come back to the hill twice with the children, and Harlan had shown Daniel the hives from a safe distance, and had let May stir the honey in the comb frame, and had found that his kitchen had a sound it hadn't had in 3 years. The particular sound of children moving through a space with the unself-conscious confidence of children who feel safe. Lynette came around. It took until February. She arrived one Sunday when June and the children were there, and she sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee. And May climbed into her lap without asking the way small children climb into the laps of people they have decided belong to them, and Lynette held her with the automatic tenderness of a woman who raised 3 children of her own, and something in her face settled into something different than what it had been. She called Harlan the next day and said, "She's all right, Daddy," he said. "I know it." Lynette said, "Boyd will come around." "I know that too," he said. Boyd came around in the spring, the way people come around when the argument they were making runs out of ground to stand on, not with ceremony, but quietly. Arriving one afternoon to help Harlan replace a section of the stone wall, and staying for supper, and talking to June about the orchard and the bees with the tentative respect of a man who has been wrong and is not ready to say so in so many words, but is ready to behave differently. By the time the apple trees bloomed in May, the tin dipper hung on a new nail beside the kitchen door inside the house, where Frances had always said she meant to move it someday so it wasn't out in the weather. Harlan had moved it there in January without announcement, and June had seen it and said nothing, and that was the right thing. The faded honey jar with Frances's handwriting sat on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, where May had insisted it lived. The red wool hat hung on the peg by the back door, where Daniel left it every time he came and retrieved it every time he went, until one day he left it and didn't take it with him, and nobody mentioned it, and it stayed. On a Sunday in June, after the early service, a small group of people gathered on Birch Hill, Harlan's family and June's sister and her husband, and a neighbor or two, and ate lunch at the long table under the apple trees, which were thick with green fruit now, months away from harvest, promising what they would eventually become. The bees moved in the hives above them on the hill. The day was warm and clear. May carried the honey jar around the table, showing it to everyone who would look at it, which was everyone. And Daniel found a stick and tapped the apple trees in his gentle exploratory way, and Lynette held her coffee cup in both hands and watched her father talk to June across the table with the easy, unhurried quality of two people who have run out of reasons to be careful with each other. The tin dipper was inside on its nail, but in the afternoon light coming through the kitchen window, you could see its shape, simple, plain, the kind of thing that holds what it's given and asks for nothing, and it seemed to Harlan, looking at it from the table, like the right thing to have been the beginning of all of this. A cup of water. Nothing more, and everything that turned out to be inside it. Sometimes the door that opens by compassion leads to rooms we didn't know we were missing. Not because we deserved them, or planned them, or even saw them coming, but because there is something in the act of giving to a stranger that unlocks what was always meant to be found. Who appeared in your life when nobody else was looking? Leave that in the comments. I think that person deserves to be remembered today. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes that small kindnesses matter. Subscribe to the channel, and stay, there's another story already waiting for you. Until then, God bless, and take care of the people in front of you. And never underestimate what can begin with a cup of water from a deep well, because the goodness goes further down than you think, and it comes up cold and clear and more than enough.